I think just to like hammer this point home, you've now got Larry Fink talking about tokenization as the future of finance. You've got Visa, the largest payment network in the world, talking about tokenization for payments. Like this stuff is, it's kind of like the fraud boiling effect, where so you're slowly watching the temperature rise, and you're getting closer and closer, and at some point, like you're in boiling water. And I think we're starting to see a lot of these little green shoots that will ultimately prove out to be really, really successful things.
Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Supra, the vertically integrated L1 for super dApps. They have a very cool new product coming out called Supra Containers. So head over to supra.com, that's supra.com/containers. So if you're building on an L1 and it feels a little bit crowded, or the complexity of L2 and L3s are getting you down, just head over to Supra. They'll get you sorted. Thank me later.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer. The views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another Roundup edition of Bell Curve. You got Michael's 1 and 2, Vance. How we doing?
So we've actually had our team offsite this week, so we've been shooting guns, fly fishing, whiskey tasting, mountain biking. I ate shit mountain biking, so my whole left side is completely toast. But it's been good to have the team together, and yeah, I mean we're small. We're only 13 people, so we can get everyone together in like a medium-sized conference room. But it's good to see people out there doing things they don't usually do.
Nice. Where'd you guys do it?
Park City. We always do our offsites in Park City. Maybe we do something different at some point, but it's a good mix. It's a good vibe, and the leaves are changing, so something for everyone.
And next week it'll be nice fall foliage for an SLC permissionless.
Exactly. I was gonna say Utah. That's where everyone's trying to go these days. That's the hotspot destination for. I actually saw Jito is moving. They're making like a validator hotspot. They announced Salt Lake City as a destination. So
Mountain Dow's out here too. I think I don't know what it is about Utah, but it's the skiing, it's the outdoors, it's the Mormon industriousness. There's a good mixture.
Yeah, I agree. The Mormons are great. Not big fans of alcohol, which can be a drawback depending on your perspective. But yeah, man. I also just the West in general. It's pretty dope. I get it. My whole family's out of Montana now. It took me a little while to come around about it, but it's pretty great out there. Like
beautiful.
It's not a lot to dislike. All right. Well, yeah. Looking forward to seeing you guys at Permissionless. It's been relatively pretty calm week here. Not too much going on. Maybe we could start with some of the more macro stuff before we get into the crypto stuff. But as the two stories, broader stories that I wanted to get your guys' take on is there was the vice presidential debate that happened this week in between Walz and JD Vance. And then there was also a hot jobs report that just came in earlier today. So blew past expectations. And I think folks are less worried about a recession than there's always been this, hey, are we heading into recession? And that was weighing on equities a little bit, and everything's basically up. So maybe we could actually start with the vice presidential debate. I would just, be curious to get your guys. I don't know how much you watched or just watched highlights or whatever, but just would be curious to get your guys' take on the whole thing.
I watched it, not live, but afterwards. And look, I think the debate was won by JD Vance. I think 53 million people tuned in, which is less than what you had in 2020, but still a massive number of people. It kind of put to bed this whole, like, he's a weirdo. He's not a likable person. He's a terrible VP candidate. It basically put all of that to bed. And it, showed that he's a highly intelligent, well-spoken, and also just like I actually think more of a normal person, because there were so many instances where either the moderators or Walz tried to goat him into like, let's go low and like talk about, the whole, you used to say Trump was whatever he said negatively about Trump in the past. And he kind of took all of those and just like brushed them off and just continued forward with his perspectives, which I thought was actually like a really positive thing for JD Vance, but also just like the narrative around the Republicans right now. they're not going to go low, even if they're goaded into trying to go low. So I was really impressed with him. Frankly, I was pretty underwhelmed by Tim Walz. I think he either underprepared or overprepared, but like he was not ready to be on that debate stage. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but there were many instances where JD would be talking about some perspective or some policy that he was in favor of, obviously, and Walsh would be nodding along with him. And by the end of it, felt like Walsh was agreeing with more of what JD was saying versus what Walsh was actually promoting. So I just thought that was kind of a funny comment, and I think someone brought that up recently in the last couple of days. But it's definitely, I think, as all VP debates are, probably non-consequential in terms of the outcome of the election. But I think if there was going to be anyone who was kind of on the fence or waiting in the wing to see how these two candidates represented themselves, I think they're definitely leaning towards JD after Tuesday night.
Yeah, I mean, I thought overall, I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched the first half. I also didn't catch it live. I just watched it afterwards, and I actually thought the quality was higher than I expected. I actually, maybe this is bad, I've never really tuned in. I don't have any memories of tuning in for VP debates in the past, and yeah, maybe you guys didn't either. Yeah, I was like,
the fly is the only thing that matters.
It is, yeah. So, but I tuned in. It was like pretty high quality overall. It was better than, I think, in a lot of senses, than the presidential debate. Not as memeable, but yeah, I thought it was pretty high quality in general. So
I tuned into the Kamala Mike Pence VP debate. Like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
I mean, those people are just literally from different planets. But it's interesting with JD and Tim. It's like they're both Midwestern guys. Like they both kind of try to appeal to the same rough audience, but man, like JD is just the full package. I think he presented himself as the probably rightful heir of the MAGA movement. And like, I mean, JD's staff on crypto, they own crypto. They know what crypto is. They understand what they should do on the legislative side. Having him on our side is huge. And I don't know if you've seen the polls recently, but like, it seems like Kamala's fading fast. So it'll be interesting to see, but we're what, 30 days out exactly? I think everyone is also ready to be done with this election. It's been a lot of pomp and circumstance and vitriol. I think everyone is ready for that to come to a close.
Now that we're officially in October, any predictions on October surprises other than the hurricane depleting FEMA from all of its resources or potential, Middle East conflict?
I mean, Trump, there is no surprise. He is who he is, and if they dig up anything worse than has already been found, I can't even imagine what that would be. Kamala, I think the odds are that something comes out. Like you've seen the Doug Emhoff slapping his old girlfriend, takes that have gone up on the internet, and it's on one hand he's redefining masculinity, on the other hand, yes, he did slap a woman. And so it's like a little bit incongruent what exactly that side of the campaign is going for, and I would expect that to get probably worse, not better.
Yeah, I'm wondering too if people are just so entrenched in their own views at this point that it's highly unlikely that any story is going to change anyone's perspective at this point. But I would be curious just on the because JD Vance probably in terms of crypto sophistication is probably the highest of all four presidential and vice presidential candidates. I'd be curious what, we've talked about this in the past, like it's going to take a lot to push any meaningful legislation through in the next 4 years. Like I would, again, just be happy with people not getting indicted and worried about getting arrested on U.S. soil. That would be enough for me. But if you guys could, huge ask. If you guys could wave a magic wand though, and you guys were unilaterally in charge, what would you be like pushing? What do you think the biggest, if you could only solve a couple of things, what would be at the top of your guys' lists?
I mean, so there's a laundry list, but I think some of the things that matter are basically what the Fit 21 bill incorporates, which is how is something defined as decentralized, and how does something move from a digital asset security to a digital asset commodity? Like that playbook is fundamental from a market structure perspective. There's the Digital Commodity Act, or Digital Commodities Act, which is Loomis and Gillibrand, and that's sort of like the Senate version of the market structure bill. What we have heard, at least, is that that one has potentially more legs than Fit 21 in terms of the momentum behind it. And I actually don't think, Mike, that it's going to be that hard for us to get something done in the next Congress, in the next 2 years. I think something will happen. It's probably not going to happen. Well, it's definitely not going to happen before the election. And a lame duck passing is probably also unlikely, just given the magnitude and the technicality that's required to get this done. But I think the chances that something happens in this next Congress is actually like very, very high. And what that would mean, some of the other things that I would also love to throw in there is like having disclosures around token ownership and unlock schedules, and having those be like actual filings that either you have to file with the CFTC or the SEC. Like whenever a CEO or a board member or any executive of a publicly traded company wants to buy or sell shares, like that has to be a filing that gets filed with the SEC. Like having that level of transparency, I think, legitimizes this industry in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's cost that's associated with it. There's disclosure requirements. All that stuff is burdensome. But it may sound mundane, but I think that would actually go a really long way to making this asset class much more legitimate.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I mean, that is I agree with you on if honestly, like if I could have one thing, it would just be we just need a very transparent framework that makes sense for token projects to graduate into, like, start as a non-security and whatever. I just think that's I would also say just regulation around. We haven't really had credit markets in crypto for a while. Like all of the centralized lending desks sort of blew up, and yeah, okay, they were probably not super well run businesses and they didn't have access to a lot of infrastructure, like banking infrastructure. But like we'll talk about Visa in a little bit, but the TradFi world has moved closer to crypto than it has in the past, and credit is a huge part of capital formation, and it's really good for markets in general. So I would love for credit to come back to crypto, albeit in a safer way this time, a more regulated way. But
And so I think that's one of the ramifications of having clarity around what these assets are, whether they're securities or commodities. The reason why we don't have credit is because you can't have banks or financial institutions lend against these assets because they don't know what they are. And if you have clarity as to what these assets actually are, maybe they're securities, maybe they're commodities, then you can actually use them in traditional financial institutions and ecosystems. And that's where you would get the credit. And so I think that's where it's like, if you can pinpoint one, it's the clarity on what these assets are when, in their lifetimes, because that has just massive ramifications as to who can use it and how.
On the crypto lending side, maybe that's like we can talk about a little bit, the advancements there. So in the last quarter of 2021, Genesis had 32 billion of loan originations. And I mean, outside of DeFi today, no one will lend you $1. Maybe if you have a capital partner as a bank in your venture fund, you can get a capital call letter, which basically allows you to borrow against future capital coming into the door. But what we've seen is like Maple is really growing their TVL, their fees, they're stepping up and kind of starting to occupy that same landscape of crypto denominated lending that has been dead for almost 3 years. So that has been a notable positive, and we're an investor there, so we're definitely biased. But they're growing the lending market and bringing it back. I think they're almost at 1 billion of originations. So that's I saw a tweet that said you'd never guess what 5 billion of under collateralized lending could do for the space, and I think that is true. Like that will come back and serve as a conduit for more leverage. The other one is Maker, and I mean last night what did Athena put into Maker? Like 400 million. I mean, like Sky farming has yet to turn on, but like they're starting to transition people to USDS. And even on KuCoin, where Sky is the token that represents Maker on KuCoin, but everyone's still trading Maker probably in the West. Like Sky was up like 50% a couple of days ago, but like Maker is still like, people are like kind of arbing the difference between the two. So that's turning back on as well. It's very interesting, kind of the path that crypto lending is taking. It's mostly DeFi native, which is extremely bullish for that space.
Maybe I'm wrong. I didn't realize that Sky transition was on yet.
It started, but I mean, the vast majority is still Maker.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right.
Yeah, I also think that, I mean, like Athena is a pretty interesting link here as well, where it's just opening up protocols like Maker to a whole new source of yield, right? Which is like this, what has historically been really high perp funding rates as well. And now as TradFi and DeFi are going to get closer and closer together. We had Rune and Stani on the podcast a little bit this week, and they were talking about that. And there's obviously a little bit of element of competition here, but like, hey, like let's not, it's DeFi versus TradFi here, but also I think they're pretty complementary at the same time, and it's a huge opportunity for DeFi protocols to onboard, some of this TradFi capital. So.
If Aave and Maker can resolve their differences and vow to work together, I would hope that many in this space could as well.
Sky Aave Force, baby. Yeah,
No.
makes a ton of sense. Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Supra, the new blazing fast, vertically integrated L1, which helps you scale your dApp. If you are a builder, you're probably dealing with some combination of cost, complexity, and fragmentation of existing solutions. So if you're building over an ETH L2 land, everything's feeling a little bit fragmented at the moment. And if you're building in Solana, everything is fast and on one layer, but maybe you're limited in terms of what you can do with your AppSpace. So Supra is rolling out a new product called Supra Containers. So you can head over to supra.com/containers to learn more. They offer dedicated customizable app spaces running on Supra's 500,000 TPS Layer 1 blockchain. That gives you complete control over gas tokens and fees. So some cool things you can do, you get the freedom you can use your own token, create local fee markets, or even go gasless, whatever you want. So this product isn't live yet, but because you are a faithful listener of Bell Curve, you get notified first. So head over to supra.com/containers. Thank me later. So I have a question for you guys, because there's a big talk. Everyone loves to talk about vesting schedules. This debate crops up incrementally on crypto Twitter every now and again. But I saw a lot of takes this week about just doing 100% of token unlocks at the token generation event. And I'm gonna give credit to Namada for trying just this. And I think it was partially a reaction to this kind of like low float, high FDV type meta. And I think I have some thoughts on it as well. And I think there are pros and cons to the approach, but what do you guys think just in general about like vesting in crypto and this idea of unlocking 100% of the tokens supply at TG?
Well, I mean, going back to what we were literally just talking about, this is also one of the ramifications or one of the situations that becomes more complicated than it probably needs to be because we don't have clarity on what these assets actually are. And so one of the reasons why you've had at least a year of unlock and kind of like a year cliff, it's commonplace that insiders, so investors and team, have a lockup schedule where they don't get everything or they don't get a portion of it immediately. And that's typically, for those that don't know, that's typically a 1 year cliff and then a 1 to 3 year additional unlocking schedule. And so that's typically how these token agreements work. And if you're a founder of this protocol, you also want to be on that same schedule or something similar because you are also held to the same standards as investors. If these are declared to be, digital asset securities or securities in general, there's a rule with the SEC called Rule 144, which has to do with statutory underwriting status. And so if you are an insider for these assets and they're declared to be securities and you are transacting in them, and it's not 100% clear, but typically a year is what is the industry norm for, the statutory underwriter status to not be relevant. But if you are deemed to be transacting in these assets ahead of that, there's a real big risk. And so there are regulatory reasons why you need to have some sort of lockup schedule, but also usually a cliff of a year. And so that's just like a technical impossibility for why if you wanted to go the route of having U.S. investors or U.S. persons involved and not having a vesting cliff, it's a dangerous proposition. But I think broadly, the reason why people are upset with this is because of the high FDV low float phenomenon, which means you've got this massive scale opportunity. Investors are looking at it like they've got this massive winning opportunity, and only 2% of the float is available, but it's worth $50 billion. And on paper, your investment in this locked up token is worth, whatever. And I think that has caused a lot of consternation from not only just like the people involved, retail who are buying these assets, who look at the unlocked or the vesting schedules, and they're preparing to get dumped on as maybe less long-term oriented VCs are selling their assets as soon as they get unlocked. But I also think it's kind of a perverse incentive from an investor standpoint as well, because a lot of, and we hear this from our LPs every once in a while, but some investors value things differently when they're reporting to their LPs. And there's a couple of funds who are in the same rounds of the same investment reported a massive increase when it went up, and then of course it dropped and it went a massive decrease down the next quarter. And that back and forth is ultimately not good for the industry, but also from just like a fund management perspective. And so you've got these like weird incentive structures. And so I think the best path forward is to have a higher level of float initially. You don't necessarily need to have this like 7 or 8 year vesting schedule or unlock schedule, but ultimately what it comes down to is, can you prove out value for the asset and the protocol in the time that you're unlocking the tokens? Where this gets to be an issue is you've got basically a mismatch of value accrual or valuable servicing that the protocol is creating while the tokens are unlocking. And so if you can figure out a way to make your product, service, protocol, whatever successful over the period of time, I think most people won't care about an unlocking process because people will want it and it'll be worth something. And so that's kind of the backdrop that we think about with it.
Yeah, I mean, great. Unlock our tokens. We still can't sell for a year under Rule 144. And like Rule 144 is not a guideline. Like they will put you in jail if you break that rule. And
you're deemed to be a statutory underwriter.
You need to be a statutory underwriter. I think a simpler fix is, two things. Number one, understanding that the float, the FDV, the whatever, if you're building something that's truly novel and is going to have a big place in the future of crypto, your token will do well. There will probably be some turbulence during unlocks, but guess what? All IPOs have 6-month lock periods as well, minimum. Number two, we need to fix the block explorers of new chains, because like there's been some sleuthing on the Twitterverse recently of like, oh shit, we didn't understand how this chain's block explorer worked or that chain's block explorer worked, and you can see people selling staking rewards or selling token, and like if people can't tell, like that's like the worst of all worlds. Like there's no disclosure, there's also no transparency, and for an industry that's supposed to be based on transparency, we need that. So having some sort of standardized canonical block explorer for everything where you can understand who's selling and who's buying, and if it's staking rewards, if it's non-staking rewards, like that is the first thing, is that everyone needs to be on an even playing field with information.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges as well of like, frankly, all these different layer ones, like the way that they handle like their constructions and the way that they handle data is super different. And so it's just very like, just the infrastructure of extracting data is just very tough, especially when there's not a really large like subscription market for data or something like that. It's definitely a big market structure difference in between crypto and something like TradFi. So totally agree, Vance. It's a thorny, weird problem that there's not a great solution to, because like crypto's in theory very transparent, in practice less so a lot of the time. Yeah.
Also, this gets solved once again. I know, going back to like the things that we could wave our magic wand with. It's like if you had disclosure requirements, people had to tell you when insiders were offloading, or there's this thing in traditional finance where if you're a knowledgeable employee and you have like proprietary information at the company, you have to file what's called the 10b5-1 plan with the SEC. And it's basically like for executives or people who are close to the product or the revenue who would know. And it's like, here's my plan to sell all of my shares. And basically like the prime, like the TD Ameritrades or the Charles Schwabs, sell on your behalf. It'll be like a time-based process or a price-based process. And imagine if we were to have those for tokens. It's like, I'm not able to sell. I'm not able to, like, I'm a founder, I'm an investor, whatever. Like I can't even hit the sell button. It's like, it's handled by Coinbase for me. And like, I have filed this thing with, whatever regulator, and like, it's totally offloaded. Like that also solves such a problem as well. Because it's not just the investors who are potentially unlocked and potentially dumping on retail. It's also sometimes the people who work there.
Last thing I'd say on this is so Rule 44 applies in a variety of circumstances where it's kind of unclear is like staking rewards. And if you're not buying it from someone, you're just getting it for participating in the network. There is an argument that you're not subject to Rule 144. We personally don't take that stance, but a lot of people do. And I think if you want to get really into the crux of some of the issues here is what are we doing with staking rewards? If investors own 5% and they're earning 20% in that first or second year and they're able to sell that, we need just more clarity and just more of a social consensus on how we're treating that. And a lot of it comes down to understanding how the block explorers work.
Yeah, well said. And the other, just to address the other side of this point that you sometimes hear as well, is we actually need longer lockups, right, to solve this issue. And some people advocate for 8-year lockups, and it's dude, if your working life is
8 years,
huh?
8-year
lock. I mean, it's if you work from 20 to 65, that's 20% of your working life, right? That's way too long. And it's kind of a lot of things. Really, what we should just be doing is growing into these valuations by creating products that people want. And then these lockups aren't a problem because they're, to your point, there have been big unlocks. And sometimes there's a little bit of, price turbulence around that, but protocols that are actually worthwhile and that people want, power through those, right? There are tons of examples. Maybe not a ton.
A really basic way to think about this is the unlock schedule should match your expectations of finding product market fit.
Wow. So yeah, totally agree.
And the lockup schedule is not the defining feature of your product. And we've taken a couple pitches and one will soon be announced. But we've got founders pitching us yeah, this could be worth $1 trillion. And they kind of build up to it and okay, blah, blah. And it's the last thing we're thinking about is it's great. When are we unlocking? Can we shorten the cliff? It's no, we have a 10-year venture fund. We're not selling tokens in the first year. So it's just about being ambitious, and you have to believe that new things are coming on chain that are going to be really exciting. And we definitely do.
Yeah. Completely agree. All right. I want to get your guys' take on, there was an announcement this week from Visa. So Visa is launching a new platform, which is actually built for banks to make it much easier to tokenize. So they're calling it their VTAP, their Visa Tokenized Asset Platform. And yeah, it's a new platform that allows banks to more easily issue, tokenized, I guess in theory, dollars is what this is most likely going to end up be. Although in theory, it's a generic platform that you can do basically anything with. There are 3 value propositions that they kind of led with here. It's easy integration. So it provides a platform for banks to mint, burn, and transfer fiat-based tokens, such as tokenized deposits and stablecoins, and experiment with use case. This kind of plugs into their massive customer network, and in theory makes it really easy for banks to do this if they want. It's programmability. So VTAP is designed to enable banks to use fiat-backed tokens within smart contracts. So you have some of the functionality that people in crypto are used to. And interop. So there's a growing ecosystem where tokenized real-world assets are being issued across multiple permissioned public and public blockchain networks. Visa's vision is to enable interop across different blockchains for banks utilizing the Visa platform. So in theory, this could lead to many more banks, being issuers and moving, I guess, stable coins in general on crypto rails. So it's just cool to see Visa leaning in and doing this. We always want to celebrate the companies like Visa that are actually deep in the weeds on the crypto space. But what's your guys' take on this whole kind of announcement in general?
I mean, when you meet with any of these large investment banks or asset management firms, one of the first thing you realize is they might be into crypto, but they have no idea how to transact. And it's tokenization is interesting. Cool. We're going to kickstart a 3-year study on how we might bring this on chain. Visa just shortcuts this and accelerates the velocity of assets being issued on chain by probably years for each of these institutions. I mean, you see Biddle, they're, close to $1 billion. You see all these other asset issuers, but those are partner. I think Biddle is Securitize. But even Securitize has a hard time going to the larger banks and getting them on board. But a name like Visa, that is how you make this happen. And our view on tokenization is this is going to be the next couple decades of finance, bringing things on chain. And you start with stable coins, you transition to fixed income. But we've even talked to large private credit firms. Can't name any names at the moment, but their their rationale for putting their assets on chain, which are pretty bespoke, is like, man, if we can get 1% more liquidity on these things, like that makes a world of difference to our fund structure and performance. But also the cost drops so dramatically that like for us, I mean, not getting into too much detail, but like even our audit and admin costs are probably $500,000 a year per
Yeah.
fund.
Wow.
If you can drop that down, man, like you widen the aperture for anybody to have assets issued on chain in the next 6 months.
Yeah, I think just to like hammer this point home, you've now got Larry Fink talking about tokenization as the future of finance. You've got Visa, the largest payment network in the world, talking about tokenization for payments. Like this stuff it's kind of like the frog boiling effect, where so you're slowly watching the temperature rise, and you're getting closer and closer, and at some point, like you're in boiling water. And I think we're starting to see a lot of these little green shoots that will ultimately prove out to be really, really successful things. And I just saw this morning as well, Swift, who, for anyone who's been following
Yep.
the Link ecosystem, has been allegedly working on a proof of concept for like the last 7 years, finally announced that in 2025, they will be moving tokenized assets of value through the Swift network.
Let's go.
This
Let's
stuff
go.
happens, slowly and then suddenly. And years of overnight successes ultimately take years of development. But I think we're going to start to see some of the largest institutions in finance start to move in this direction, for fear that, in the same way that the internet basically like decided the victors in the new age of media and content and and so many other categories as well. I think financial institutions have gotten smart to the innovator's dilemma, and they have seen what can happen if you get displaced by not following the tech trends and not being at the forefront. And I think that same effect is going to happen. But to the point earlier, it's going to take a long time before we look back and we say, "Wow, that was a crazy decade." But it is all happening all at once. This year and next.
Yeah, huge shout out to Chainlink. There, like Sergey has been laser focused on this for so long. He's come on the show before. We've had CLG Chainlink on the show before as well, and those link rooms, they've just been like laser focused on this mission for as long as I've been interacting with that community. And yeah, huge credit and props to them. What do you guys think? I wonder if, just trying to think through some of the second order implications here, it probably means more stablecoins are coming on chain, I would guess.
Correct.
Maybe from some big household brands. Like, I don't know if do you guys remember, like, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago that JPM launched like JPM coin, and it was like this interbank transfer mechanism digital dollar that I think only worked for. And it's like, hey, you could get a JP Morgan backed stable coin. I mean, if you look at this like one way chart of Tether market cap, it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, you start to get like JPM coin dollars, JPM backed dollars floating around. That's got to eat into that market share a little bit.
Look, one of the other things that would be on my wish list of magic wand waving, and I think this will also happen, and we didn't touch on this, but having understanding of what stablecoins are and how they will function within the financial infrastructure is going to be a seminal moment, because what that will do, and it'll probably be a separate bill. There's a couple of drafts that have been floated around, at least from a U.S. Geographic perspective. It's not like we're waiting. It's not like the banks are waiting for the technology to be able to build this stuff.
Right.
They're waiting for regulatory clarity so that they know how to interact with this stuff. And the second that there's understanding, JPM coin, which is maybe interbank and for settlement purposes across whatever books and records they're using it for, that internal coin on day zero of this implementation of this stablecoin bill becomes an external stablecoin. And you're starting to see this with like PayPal with their Pay USD, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And Circle is allegedly, in the works to go public in 2025 as well. Stable coins, one of the questions we've gotten recently in talking with our investors is like, what are the benchmarks of success that you use to track, progress in crypto? One of them is stable coins on chain. And if we can build, more institutional adoption and tens of billions or hundreds of billions more of stablecoins come on chain, that's just like the lifeblood of this industry, especially from a DeFi perspective.
Yeah. You know what's might be a funny consequence of this? The first thing that I thought when I was reading this announcement is, man, there are going to be a lot of new stable coins. And you're like, well, how many different stablecoin brands do we need, right? There's going to be Tether, there's going to be USDC, there's going to be JPM, USD, Bank of America, USD, whatever. But that's actually the way that dollars really work in general. You just don't think about it like that, right? Every single dollar that's issued through a bank, your counterparty is that bank. And they've just become like too big to fail in general. But it's going to be funny to watch that play out on chain because you haven't normed everything to just call it a dollar yet. And the US doesn't necessarily back certain institutions, like probably isn't going to back dollar up. Well, if it gets big enough, it probably will. But yeah, it'll be funny to watch that whole dynamic play out also. But
I think this cycle, call it next 2 to 3 years, there's a trillion of stable coins on chain pretty easily.
Which,
what do you,
they're what, 300 right now. So it's like a more than tripling, 200. It's like a 5X.
A trillion, it's real money.
Right.
yeah. How do you guys think, if at all, this impacts like L1 tokens, like just from a investment perspective? Like I can imagine I think part of the value proposition of chains like Ethereum or Solana or whatever is that they're kind of like this nice, historically been nice like supply sinks, right? Like you get applications on there and it kind of creates demand in roundabout ways for the native token. And I think this is working right now with L2s on Ethereum. It creates a lot of demand for ETH, the asset. On Solana, everything's on one layer now. It's probably not going to be on one layer forever. But, if you start to see a lot of people, there's a really strong preference for transacting in dollars in general. Like, do you think it's on the margin less demand for something like Solana or ETH? Like, do you think it's irrelevant? But the reason I asked, we're talking about Chainlink, and some of the Chainlink folks that I talked to have had this perspective for a while. They're like, look, it's hard to be bullish on this stuff when, you think that a lot of real world assets are coming on chain and people are going to want to use that. So how, if at all, do you think that impacts?
I mean, look, I think even going back to Bitcoin and the white paper, I think using an asset that doesn't have the canonical unit of account that people are used to transacting in is a really, really hard way to build a payments network. And, not only from the perspective of like, well, I sent you 0.01 Bitcoin. How much is that worth? I got to do the math and like think about it. And it's like, how much is that worth is always the question that people get back to because they dollarize it eventually. How much is it worth? Oh, well, it was like $50 at the time. Now it's worth $500. There's also the effect, which is kind of like an unfortunate fact, but it is the case, in that if it's over $600 and you have a gain on that, non-dollarized asset, you have to report that from a tax perspective. Yeah. And so I think that there's just like completely separate, ecosystems that we're talking about here. One of them is ultimately going to be the dollarized payments ecosystem, where people are using stable coins. Maybe it's JPM coin, maybe it's PayPal coin, maybe it's USDC as it already is, to pay for things. And that's like the payment side of it. And then I think there's sort of the token side of it. And those are, assets. And that's kind of how we think about them. They can be used as collateral. And many people use ETH as collateral, SOL as collateral, et cetera, et cetera. But they represent something completely different. And I kind of don't see them as interrelating as much anymore. But I do think, I don't think that having more stablecoins on chain will reduce demand. In fact, I think what that does is it has more value accrual ultimately to that token if you have the right token economic structure. Like that's why I say stablecoins are the lifeblood of blockchain networks. It's because they're going to be the biggest fee drivers for these ecosystems, especially as payments grow.
And, especially this is one area where I do think crypto native stablecoins have a bit of an edge because the trend is going to be returning a lot of those fees to holders of the stablecoin. And I mean, I don't know. Everyone's been looking at Tether's business and being like greatest business model of all time. Well, everyone sees those profits, right? And it's
Right.
all it takes is a matter of time for someone to come in and say, hey, we should be like giving some of this back to users. And I know Rune's perspective on this is like all of it needs to go back to the users. And that's just the starting point. And I think he is totally right on that. Like just completely right on that.
I can't remember if we talked about this here, if it was another conversation, but the venture capitalists in Palo Alto right now are noticing Tether. and they're paying attention, and they're saying, "How the hell did we miss that?"
And they're going. I mean, I would argue the reason that Tether is so dominant is because it's so dominant. It started first. It got the network effects, and like stablecoins are as pure of a network effects business as you can think of. Like even more so than social media. Um, I personally think the real money is going to be made in the race for like, okay, if Tether gets to 200 billion of stablecoins on chain, what are the number 2 and number 3 providers worth? And I think like the circles of the world, like I think there was some recent secondary that happened at like 3 or 4 billion. I was very surprised to see it clear that low, but I think that's reflective of the fact that it's a big organization that looks like BlackRock. It has a ton of headcount. It has an office in the World Trade Center. Like there's just a ton of expenses behind that. Tether has like 5 people, including Paolo. Maker has like, a very, very small amount of people, and it's distributing kind of the ownership and the employment throughout the network of sub DAOs. But we continue to believe like the real money is going to be made if you can pick the number 3 stablecoin that has enduring value that's going to grow, 100% year over year for the next 3 years.
Yeah. And one of maybe another thing about USDC as a business is there's a pretty decent revenue split with Coinbase. And like Coinbase is great for USDC in general, but if you view the crypto exchanges as the distribution platform for stablecoins, which historically they have been, it maybe for some of the other exchanges it feels a little bit less neutral. It's like you're funding your competitor in a sense with USDC. So I think something like this is Guy from Athena's perspective. I just recorded with him and Kain earlier today, but he's like big believer that it has to be neutral. So that's also something I think that Sky. By the way, not a I'm sure USDC is going to be great. A huge fan of Circle and that entire team, and Coinbase for what it's worth. But I think there is this is a lot of stuff that the Bitcoiners talk about, and a lot of Ethereans talk about just money as being neutral, and like all that stuff is very true. And I also think that's probably another area that USDS can differentiate itself on, basically. So
yeah, I think the takeaway from this is it's abundantly clear there's going to be so many different flavors of stablecoins.
Totally. Yeah.
And decentralized, centralized, jurisdiction as well. Like we've seen a number of pitches of protocols that are building stablecoins that are going after specific geographic areas because there's a regulatory loophole to be able to do Western Europe, and you can pass back revenue back to the user. Like there's just going to be so many shots on goal.
Yeah. Last like big story, I guess, for the week. It's not even a huge story, but some people got very excited about the fact that Ripple was filing for an XRP. Bitwise was filing for an XRP ETF, and they set up like a trust institution based out of Delaware, etc. The other thing that Bitwise did that went a little bit under the radar, but I at least thought was sort of cool, is they have these Trendwise strategies. So there are 3 of them. It's a rotation strategy from Bitcoin into Treasuries, ETH into Treasuries, and then a mix of Bitcoin and ETH equal weighted into Treasuries. And it's, obviously it has to be a more actively managed fund, but the idea is, when you want to ride up the exposure when Bitcoin or ETH is doing well, but, it's pretty obvious when it's not doing well. It's this like 4-year cycle thing. And so maybe you don't time the top and bottom perfectly, but if you catch the meat on both directions, then it probably beats just holding flat. So I thought that was kind of cool as well. And it's just indicative of the different flavors of ETFs that will get filed now that we've got the Bitcoin and the ETH, and we'll probably get some other weird assets like XRP and Litecoin and Doge and whatever. But I thought it was an interesting example of new.
It's you do the math and like, yeah, if you sold the top and then you bought the bottom, you'd outperform just holding it flat. But like,
it's hard to do that.
I find that most of the game for us is like keeping yourself calm, not panicking, not making any rash decisions. And like once you put an asset out of your, cold storage in a security deposit box, I'm never selling this. Like, and once you put it mentally in that trading bucket, it's like, I think Berniske has the best line. It's like soap, the more you touch it, the less you have. And the amount of things where I've been like, man, that was a really good trade. The average, hold period was like, I look at like my net worth, and like the things that have driven changes are like things that I've held for 6 years and just forgotten about, or just had like some psychotic perspective of like, I am not going to sell this come hell or high water. I'm just going to diamond hand it. And then I look at the things that I did sell, and it's like, well, fuck, it rallied 4x from there, and I should have just stayed put. So, you kind of gotta, you can't be both a trader and an investor. Maybe some people can. I personally don't think I can, and maybe Michael has a different opinion. But like, you got to kind of decide who you are as an investor, and if you're trading against these algos, you're going to lose. But one way you can beat them is just not participating until you've deemed it's time. And like, 6 years sounds like a long time, but I look back and those are the things that have mattered to me, at least.
I mean, yeah, the principle here is concentration is how you build wealth, diversification is how you maintain it. It is okay, I think, especially earlier in your life, to have insane amounts of asset or industry concentration, if it's something that you believe in and something that you know. That's basically how Vance and I live our lives. But I think, when it comes to new trading strategies or new asset strategies, like Bitwise is the gold standard. And they're going to be, I think, like the differentiated asset perspectives, whether it be single asset ETFs, different trading strategies, baskets of categories. Like there's a DeFi fund that I know that they track as well.
Yeah.
Like that type of creativity, I think, is going to go a long ways. And they're also the ones that are, pounding the pavement, going out and meeting with tens of thousands of registered investment advisors who are, managing wealth for average Americans. And I think that will go also a long way. Once you have the products and the distribution, then you get the industry norm. Like everything's going to kind of turn on, I think, at a certain point. Once again, it's like the overnight success. I wouldn't say, I don't think that they would say that they're there yet, but this is the years of toiling away to get them in the position to be at that overnight success moment, whenever that may happen. I'm sure it'll happen soon. But I think that there's going to be a lot more of these different types of products, frankly, as we get more regulatory clarity. And, a month away from the election, I think there's an outcome, with Trump where these products, and XRP, just as an example, there's still, there was an appeal this week by the SEC in the case with Judge Torres. And so there's still a question as to like, what's the status of XRP itself? There's definitely a lot riding on, that judge and that appeal process. And immediately Ripple came out and said that they're going to counter appeal and they're ready to fight again. This was part of the expected outcome. But I think that's, it's going to be this back and forth until we have clarity. But once there's clarity, it's like game on. And first at the starting gate is going to get, best position.
And what will happen before clarity, in a Trump or a Kamala administration, is a new appointment to the head of the SEC. And we've heard some pretty interesting names thrown around. Some are, the usual characters. Some are, left field, let's call it. But I think the front runner for the SEC under a Trump administration are Chris Giancarlo, Crypto Dad, and Hester Peirce, Crypto Mom. And then under a Democratic administration, I think, I remember when we were all so excited that Gary Gensler was going to be the SEC chair because he understood crypto.
Yeah.
But I think even in that administration, like, he has pissed off so many people inside and outside of crypto that the next SEC chair, it didn't used to be a politically contentious thing to just, nominate someone and have them pass through. But there's going to be a lot of thought, time, and effort put into who that is exactly in a Kamala administration. But our view. We don't think that's going to happen.
What was Gary Gensler's strategy here? He's not an unintelligent person. Why did he go and ruffle so many feathers? What was the strategy?
So, what we have heard, at least, is that it wasn't Gary Gensler who was the one that was pushing all of this perspective by himself. And that there was a lot of, frankly, Elizabeth Warren perspective that he was acting as a conduit for. And it was a choice of a certain number of industries. And if you remember back, like crypto was not in the crosshairs immediately. There was actually a lot that was done in terms of ESG and DEI efforts that ultimately got shot down. But there were a number of kind of initiatives, I would say, that he took on, crypto being one of them, and crypto became the most vocal, especially after 2022 and everything that happened there. But this is, at least from our understanding and what we've heard, is that that he was basically acting as a mouthpiece for Elizabeth Warren. And it wasn't having to do with crypto itself. It was all just a political game. And that, who knows what was promised or what was kind of insinuated by, acting in this way. There were rumors that he wanted to run. Obviously, he didn't, but he wanted to run for the open seat in Maryland when that came up this year. And didn't happen, won't happen. There were rumors that he was vying for Treasury Secretary at one point. Obviously, didn't happen, won't happen. But I think, the takeaway was that this was largely just a political game. And him being very intelligent on crypto meant that he actually was well positioned to go after it in a way that, could actually, bring down or add a bunch of damage to the industry.
Man, Elizabeth Warren, man. Yeah, I'm from Massachusetts. I know she's Massachusetts. Like,
bro, what have you been doing down there?
I don't know, man. I'm telling you, Mass a great state. She didn't used to be like this, I didn't think. I mean, I never really paid that much attention to politics, but I don't get where a lot of this is coming from. Is this...
My dad says she looks like Elmer Fudd.
I don't know, man. I want to believe best intent, like whenever you can, but this feels such like an attack. I mean, at this point, it's just...
Vance's dad also has a line that if given the opportunity, Gary Gensler would regulate baseball cards.
He's got some unpopular opinions. Let's call him that. He's an old guy,
Yeah. Well, I guess the last big question for you guys is, who do you think is going to win this fight between Kain and David at Permissionless this year? They've both been training. I don't know if you see it. Like the training has been real, at least a little bit last month.
Kain, I don't know. Like you may have to like break his arm off to get him to tap out. David, I think I don't know. Kain is the angrier one for sure. But like we saw Karate Combat in Singapore, and one of the last fights was like the main fight. One of the guys dropped out, and then like there was this African American guy who is just like living in Thailand, and they gave him a call the night before. They were like, "Hey, like will you fight this dude who's been training for months?" He was like apparently out partying the night before. He like flies from Thailand to Singapore that morning. Like you can tell he's like hungover a little bit. I mean, he was on the ropes the first round, but like then he just started throwing haymakers. And that's the thing about Karate Combat. There's no wrestling. It's just like, rock'em sock'em robots, so it can go either way. But I think my money's on Kain.
Just same perspective, different reason. Kain's got at least 6 inches of reach on David. So I think that because it's just punching, that is a huge advantage.
I'll back my boy David here and say the reason I'll give you is just, it's an endurance game more so than anything else. I think David's been training, and it'll be a great fight either way.
It is I don't know if you guys have ever been in the ring or, wrestling or anything like that, but it is the longest 2 minutes of your entire life.
Yeah.
I mean, you see these fights on TV and you're like, I get in there. And then you go to Karate Combat. Nick Carter, I was hanging out with him. He was like, when are you going to get in there? There's 0% of my body that needs to be in that ring.
No. You know what? Nick is, why I'm saying an additional layer of bravery to this, especially guys who are very like visible on Twitter, etc., is because if there was ever like a gif of you getting knocked out or something like that, that is following you around for forever.
So, lot of respect for both of them for getting in the ring, and anybody else that does it as well. It's just
Hundo P. Yeah, me either. All right, fellas, this was a fun one. I think we can call it, and I'll see you guys soon. And we'll be doing this, I think, live from Permissionless next week, so should be fun.
Looking forward to seeing everyone.
Same.
Later.
Later.